Ladies and gentlemen, open finance pioneers. Well, I normally say that opening to a room jam-packed with our amazing community. Now we're all virtual and together we're all finding our new norm. So I would like to say thank you for joining us and welcome to our first live streaming session. And I hope you're well, and I also hope your families are fit well and virus-free. So over the next hour, we hope to provide you with some much needed respite and a little light relief from all your news notifications. And what better way to do that than with like-minded pioneers around what is now our virtual campfire. And it's been actually quite remarkable just how everybody this week has pulled together to make this happen. Not just our amazing community, but and the speakers, they have not missed a beat. They've been absolutely game in leading the way. But also other industry communities and media partners have truly and very tightly collaborated together. So I'd like to just take a moment here just to say thank you and to give them a little bit of a name check. So they are Diane from PIF, Paul at Vendorcom, Gavin and the extraordinary Gala, how could we forget you, and all of the OBIE team, as well as Mark from the FinTech Times, and our fantastic sponsors. Jim Wadsworth, you deserve a special name check and to be mentioned in dispatches, so a big thank you to you. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep you company and we're going to keep you informed. And what we're going to do is throughout this COVID curve, we're going to provide some innovative, if I can say the word, and fun ways of doing just that with a few twists. And what you'll see is the speakers have actually had some fun with their backgrounds. I'm on brand with a star behind me, but everybody else has had a little bit more fun, those that have managed to crack the Zoom settings. So, as I said, we're going to keep you all connected with some more digital content. So if you'd like to partner with us, simply reach out to me. You all know how to get hold of me. Alternatively, you can follow us on any of our social media channels. But tonight, we're going to be feeding you with content, and we've donated all our hospitality budget to those in need through First Love Foundation. I would just like to say a quick thank you to Martin. We're in safe hands with Martin and his team who are hosting the live streaming session. This week, he's already facilitated a session with over 4,000 COVID-19 lab technicians around the world, just phenomenal. So let me talk to you about the here and now. I'm going to pass over to Hugh Davis, who will introduce our stars for the evening. That's our amazing panel of experts. During this session, it's their opportunity to share with you some of their user cases, but it's also your opportunity, as we always do, to get involved. You can do that via Slido, and you can also ask questions via our poll as well. So all I would say is do get involved, have some fun, and help us shape the discussion today. What we're trying to do here is to recreate the OBE that we normally have in the physical world virtually. So we've got Karina, the very talented Karina, graphically recording everything. So it's over to Hugh. Without further ado, Hugh, would you like to introduce the panel?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Helen. Yeah, so this is an interesting experience. I was fully expecting to be stood up, having had my fill of pizza, and yeah, this feels very different. This is definitely a week of learning new ways of working, and what better way of doing that than streaming it in front of hundreds of people? What could possibly go wrong? But yeah, hopefully we'll have a really good discussion tonight. The theme is open finance. We've got a really good panel, I think, to drive the discussion, and in a moment I'll ask them all to introduce themselves. I've asked the family to try and avoid any comedy entrances behind me, and kept the dog away and things, but you never know. We'll see what happens. In terms of I guess open finance, it feels like it's the next logical move from open banking, and perhaps just a word on that before we get into the open finance discussion. We're just over a couple of years in now to the open banking journey, and we've talked a few times at the OBE events about the continual growth in momentum, and I think we're still seeing that, and hopefully the changes and the challenges we're going through at the moment won't get in the way of that, won't prevent that. The the ecosystem will continue to grow and thrive. I mean, at the moment, we're at a point in the open banking ecosystem. We've got 218 live participants. So that's banks and the various third parties delivering open banking based services. Far more than that when we consider all of the different businesses and propositions that are working with those authorized players to deliver solutions to end customers. I mean, if we look at just the community that are using the sandbox at the moment as well, there's another 355 participants playing around in the sandbox that haven't gone live in production yet. We're seeing a huge breadth of use cases. In fact, we were talking earlier today where we're now really starting to see payments use cases kicking off in a big way as well. We've always talked 2020 will be the year that payments will really start to take off, and we're seeing the early stages of that. So we're seeing a huge array of use cases forming, and I'm looking forward to talking more about the open finance use cases we can expect to see shortly. We're also seeing a really broad range of players in the ecosystem, from new innovative small FinTechs through to some of the biggest giants in the world of payments, the world of loyalty, the world of data management. So it really is a diverse ecosystem. And the measures that we often talk about at OBIE are some of the usage measures, and the monthly API call volumes just continue to grow at a staggering rate. So I think the January number was 325 million, I think. And what we've seen is pretty much month on month, a 30 to 40% increase in volumes. And these are the API calls to the CMA 9 group of banks, but it's pretty representative of the market. That means that every 3 months, the whole market is doubling. And we've seen this as a consistent exponential growth. So I think we're 2 years in, just over now. We talked earlier in the year about 1 million regular users. This is the month where screen scraping services are all being completely transitioned. I think by the end of March, we'll also have a really significant number of SME businesses that are using open banking to drive their businesses and their feeds into their accounting platforms. So I think we're in a position where the open banking ecosystem, whilst it's still fairly early days, and this is a big transformation, is in pretty rude health and is showing some really good signs. So open finance feels like the next logical place to go. So before we get into the discussion, it would be great if the panelists could perhaps give themselves a quick introduction, who they are, what organization they work for and what they do. And then, looking forward to getting stuck into some detailed questions around the new horizon that is open finance. So perhaps, Brad, if we could start with you, and I'll perhaps prompt each of you in turn.
Thanks, Hugh. Thanks for Open Banking Excellence for continuing to provide this forum in a digital format. It's an interesting times we live in, for sure. So hello, everybody. I'm Bradley McGuinness. I'm a co-founder at a startup called Tarpico. And at Tarpico, we're very much in the open finance space, sort of already, I would say. And we do that in 2 ways, essentially taking the open banking APIs into a single aggregated API. Not that different to many other people I know, but what we're doing is bringing that into the advisory and wealth space. And we do a couple of value adds on top of that to make it more appropriate for that use case. And the second point is we help advisory and wealth systems, these platforms and applications, get their data out. So getting it out into, at the moment, what is sort of selected third-party applications. So that is the realm that Tarpico operates in.
Thanks, Brad. Sam, do you want to go next?
Hi, welcome to everyone. I hope everyone is not too poorly on this very dreary Thursday evening. But just wanted to say thanks to Helen again, a big shout out to Helen, and also to you, Hugh, as well. Thank you very much for chairing this. But yes, so Money Hub Enterprise is commercially focused on the enterprise market. We do have a direct to consumer and grew up really as a PFM. but I guess have always been open finance, because we obviously started life screen scraping. And you don't just screen scrape the CMA9, you screen scrape everything. So we're really pleased recently with March 14th with all the credit cards that have shifted over. That's amazing, because that is a large chunk of people's spending. So you get now just the CMA9 and all the credit cards, which does actually end up being 74 different connections. And I think we shouldn't underestimate, that it takes some time and effort to get from where we have been and to where we are now. So that's brilliant. But it can't stop there. So, for example, the use cases, you talk about the use cases, Newbury Building Society, a little building society that really provides the consumers its services with a really niche product. So teachers that wouldn't ordinarily get a mortgage from the CMA9 will get a mortgage from Newbury Building Society. And that's because they still do their own credit underwriting, and they can provide niche mortgages and products. But what happens to poor Newbury Building Society in this fast-paced world? Well, unless they can keep up, they're going to be out of business. So being able to provide them with an open finance platform so that their customers can use any open banking account that they've got connected, right through to making payments into the mortgage and through to their savings accounts, that really, I think, starts to bring to life why open finance is so important. And that's without mentioning the pension dashboard. So I'm on the industry steering group for the pension dashboard. I'm a FinTech representative, but really I see myself as a consumer champion. I get upset that there's 38 million pounds sitting with no home. People that have saved that money in the UK, and we can't find who to give it to. I know there's a few takers probably here around the table. We'd be putting our hand up. But at the end of the day, it's very sad that we auto-enroll people into pensions, and we get to the other end and we find we cannot link them up to the money that they've earned. So I feel very passionate and strong about open finance addressing some of these issues.
Thank you, Sam. Stephen, perhaps if you could introduce yourself next.
Yes, Stephen Wright. So from NatWest Group, I kind of lead regulatory engagement and industry engagement on API standards covering open banking, open finance. We are one of the CMA9, and we're also acting as a AISP, PISP in the market. And a big shout out to Open Banking Excellence for setting this up. I think it's a fantastic event. And just the conversations we've had before we got going tonight were really good, I thought, and highly collaborative. And for me, some of the big use cases for open finance, I think the first one is really giving consumers a view of their entire finances. Open banking PSD2 just covers payment accounts. And quite frankly, the majority of a customer's wealth or debt is actually tied up in other products that aren't covered there. So being able to give them that view and to give them better advice, better product comparisons, and actually help them have better financial health as a result, I think is really big benefit. And the other thing I think is interesting as well is when you start to look at the right side of open finance and actually being able to automate onboarding to new products. If you look at the mortgages market, if you look at some of investments, other products, insurance, how through APIs and kind of sharing customer data attributes, as well as their account and kind of identity, KYC, etc., how you can actually automate onboarding and actually make switching easier.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah. So just continuing the introduction, so Shefali, perhaps if you could introduce yourself next.
Sure, happy to. Thank you so much for inviting us, TrueLayer, but also me to speak. My name is Shefali Roy, and I'm the COO and Chief Compliance Officer at TrueLayer. Some of you may know TrueLayer. We are a technology company that's API-based, that we build products that allow applications to transfer and get the data of their end users with end user consent. And we also have a payments product, which is API-based, that allows an application to initiate a payment on an end user's account with their consent. I also sit on the FCA HMT's working group on open finance. So I'm really thrilled to be a part of this. And I'm really thrilled that we're having this conversation, because I think, like the other panelists, very much concur that open finance is really the future. And I think as an industry, we must do as much as we can to make it happen.
Fab, thanks, Shefali. And last but very not least, Kevin, could you introduce yourself?
Thanks, you. And thank you to everyone that's gone before me, and the shout outs to everybody involved in this great event. I've learned quite a bit so far. So I do three things. I'm an advisor to the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence, GOFCO, which is being rebranded. It'll be good to know. Is creating a data community and a computing facility to host a rich set of financial data for strictly approved academic researchers, policymakers, banks, the wider open banking, open life, to come in and innovate around 6 key pillars. And I'm also proud to be an advisor to Digital. We help organizations thrive by unlocking the potential of technology and people. My second hat is I invest into some startups and help a few startups get to market with a proposition. And the third bit is I'm onto the board of 2 charities focused on financial well-being and education and teaching kids to code.
Fab, thank you, Kevin. Now, before we dive into the questions, probably just a couple of logistics pieces for all of the community that are involved. You may be able to see there's a Slido board on your screen where you can submit questions. So if you've got questions burning, do please feel free to submit them. When questions then get published, if you see questions that you really like and think are really important, also feel free to like them. Obviously, those questions that have most likes, if we're being inundated, we'll try and prioritize those. Before we start as well, there's a poll that is on the screen, Slido screen. Very simple question. We'll ask it at the beginning, and we might ask a variant of it again at the end. And it very simply: do you think open finance should be mandated? Please feel free to start voting. We'll start the conversation, and in a few minutes we'll get to the results of that and use that to perhaps prompt some more questions. So for the community that are participating, yeah, please get your questions in. Please like other people's questions, and please do start answering the poll. And for now, perhaps to start the discussion amongst the panel. Shefali, you said that you were involved in the original open finance consultation, which got us to the point recently where the FCA wrote out to the whole ecosystem and asked for input. And I know many organizations have been providing that input to help shape some of the thinking. It'd be great if you could just talk to us about some of the context and background to this, and I guess what happened to lead us to this point.
Sure, happy to. Thank you. So I got to say, I mean, I wasn't the only one on this working group. There were quite a few people from HMT. Obviously, OBIE was involved. The FCA chaired it. There were a handful of consumer rights groups and other applications and entities involved. I think the starting point was really looking at potential, seeing what was really available a year and a half on from open banking. And open banking, as you all know, was really here to empower customers to be able to benefit third-party services, give them better competitive prices, competitive products, but also be able to say, look, actually, my data is mine, and I'm allowed to share with it to whoever I want. That then follows globally, where you think about Australia opening up a landscape of thinking about open finance. And open data, more like, and as the community, and as you all may know, Australia is looking at it in a really broad way, not just first looking at banks, but then looking at financial institutions of very many different types, and then looking at different verticals, things like energy, telcos, and utilities. So then you're looking at this massive open data ecosystem as opposed to just a finance one. And I think there's topics later on to talk about reciprocity and all those nuances that they're implementing. So for us in the UK, and I think this was a really enormous task by the FCA, and certainly something that we should be very proud of, thinking about, well, if open banking is going to do so well, and Hugh, you quoted some stats at the beginning of the explosion, really the last couple of weeks and months maybe, of how OBE has really taken off here. we then have to look and think, well, what else can we do to benefit the consumer and offer a British citizen as much as we possibly can to give them better services and products. And so that means you can't just have payment accounts. That means you have to have other things. And that includes pensions, mortgages, loans, various types of credit cards, different, not just a CMA9, but a whole suite and swath of financial products and financial data that then you're able to say, okay, what's the data value here? And therefore, how is the consumer going to benefit? So we started there, and from that came a multiple series of things, like how do we look at consent and consent management? How do we look at what's a sustainable model across Europe, and maybe starting with the UK, but across the UK financial landscape, and saying how does this actually work consistently? You then think about payment initiation. I think Sam was saying this earlier in our prep call. How does payment initiation become this really fantastic alternative to credit cards or other alternative methods of payment? It's cheaper, it's faster, it's more secure, it's done on Bank of England rails. Why wouldn't we do it? I would certainly do it as a consumer. I love the fact that I have that option. Improving functionality and improving APIs. Let's use technology. We're such fans of it. Let's use it well. And so we, Trulia, are an API-based platform. We're very proud of it and very deliberate about using that technology because, again, and this is part of the working groups initiative, how does that work and how does open finance work with GDPR? How is it compliant with that? How do they work and what's that marriage look like? And also thinking about security. This whole thing will not work if the consumer and the end user says, thanks so much for asking me for my consent, but I'm not going to give it to you. So how do we build trust and how do we empower the user and the end user to understand what's open banking, how's it going to be for me, and how's it going to be helpful for my financial well-being? And that's a really fundamental category to think about. And then also thinking just about the broader platform, exactly, like not just payments, but then other financial products. So the working group really started with thinking about how do we make consumers' lives better? How do we make sure that they're included? How do we make sure they're not getting cheated and they're taken for a rort? And how do we empower them so that they build trust in the financial system? And today, I mean, I think given the COVID virus fiasco and markets tanking, there's uncertainty, people are scared, people are nervous. And so this is one way to think about building that trust in a financial model and a financial system. So having those people in that working group was really fantastic because it brought the market together. It wasn't just a regulator going, okay, I'm going to draft this and send it out. We literally formed this really lovely working group to say, let's have everybody's buy-in, everybody's concerns and everybody's conversations so that it's a really robust piece of consultation work that everybody can have an opinion on.
Perfect, thanks, Shefali. One of the things you touched on there is, the importance of driving value to the end customers and the end users to get their confidence and buy-in. I'd be interested in getting views from some of the panel in terms of what are some of those use cases that really get unlocked and enabled when open finance provides a broader scope of access. And Sam, you were talking about some of the use cases you were starting to see, and obviously Money Hub has started very much from an open finance background. When open finance becomes a reality and API access across a broader range of organizations and products, what do you think that allows that you can't do today? What are some of the use cases that you're really excited about?
I think, first of all, fundamentally, it stops the siloed thinking. So we in financial services are, I mean, even if you look at the way banks are structured, everything is about a silo, like a cash ISA, investment ISA, a mortgage. I mean, they're different departments, almost different companies. And for a consumer, that isn't right. It might be right for financial services to focus on the product offering, but for a consumer, the only way you can make an informed decision is to see all of what you've got going in terms of your incoming and outgoings and your money, and that fundamentally shifts from, it's got to include your mortgage, it's got to include or your rent, it's got to include the products and services that you're buying on a regular basis, the utilities that you have to have. mean, electricity is essential, probably as a bank account. I mean, I don't think any of us would be on this call without, the power to service it all. So I don't think we can think in silos anymore. Got to think as an open finance for the consumer. But what does it enable? Well, it starts to allow you to be able to see everything, in a way that you can decide who you want to interact with, who you're willing to share your data with. And we've got a lot of use cases now, that are already up and running. So I get really cross when people say open banking hasn't worked. It is early days. I would definitely agree with people on that front. But already, we are seeing the ability for, take Mercer's and Aon already moving into financial wellness for employers to provide to their employees. Aon has an amazing benefits matching service now, which is enabled through open banking. And Mercer's have provided an amazing service to their employers with their master trust to help people understand their pension in the context of their day-to-day finances. So, we're already seeing a big shift that way. But I guess what we haven't seen and what's coming is really the retailers. And that's the bit that I think, we are not far off. But some of the use cases that we haven't seen yet that we will see with open finance is, for example, take Shell. I don't know how many of you have got Shell BP app on your phone, but I don't go to anyone else apart from Shell and BP anymore because I don't want to get out of my car. I'm Australian. I don't queue, so therefore, going into that's perfect. But the thing is, they're not using PISP yet. So they've got my credit card sitting underneath that to take the money. That's gone. I mean, it's not going to be long before that's out the door. They'll definitely use faster payments. And on top of that, why not, while I'm filling my car up, do a little bit of analysis on my energy and media subscriptions? I mean, I don't care who sees that. I'd share that with anyone. If you think you can do me a better deal or you've got some other options for me to consider. I get back on my car and Shell says, well, we can see that you only spend £25 of your £100 a month with us. Knock yourself out. If you can do the whole lot, we're going to give you, I don't know, entries to, view cinemas or whatever it is that they think is going to tickle your fancy, because basically they've done all the customer research they need to do and they're away. And who isn't going to sign up for that type of thing? I go home to my family, say everyone Shell only, right? Because we get free whatever it is they're getting. It's easy. I just think we haven't really seen the power of open banking and open finance yet, but it's so close.
Oh, thank you. And Kevin, I'm interested in your perspectives. Obviously, we're in a really tough time at the minute with what's happening around the world with coronavirus. And I know one of the things you've been looking at is how all of this broader access to different data sets can be used as a force for good and protect the vulnerable and things like that. I'd be interested in your perspective, some of the work you're doing. Just again, what opportunities you think this broader access can enable?
Thank you, and I'll come back to Samantha on the retail piece, because there's some really good use cases coming around the intersection of health and wealth and staying fit and living longer, etc. So, but first I'll answer yours. So we see the road to open life. So at GovCo we see the natural transition from open banking to open finance to open life, and that's happening. Legislation is coming to bring that to life. The citizens' data rights in Australia that Shefali touched on, the fact that Ofcom are looking at releasing mobile data, there's a program around that, and that's really exciting for anyone in innovation and seeing the benefits of new data sets being realized. At GovCo, we're looking at real data, synthetic data, anonymized data, and looking at areas of reducing financial crime and risk. So an example would be there's a big problem for money mules at the moment. It's a relatively easy thing to spot if people come together, but you need the international payments, you need the bank, you need the mobile operator, you need a number of actors to say, right, we're going to try and solve money mules. And we're going to look at young children, young adults in university being exploited for drug trafficking and et cetera. So they're the sorts of use cases that is currently being looked at. We've got one use case at the moment looking at household expenditure. To do that, you need multiple data sets to get a true view of ins and outs. and looking at an impact where we can change behaviours towards saving for a fair pension in the future. That's a specific use case. Sustainable finance and positive impact on climate change is another pillar that we've got a number of use cases in. And then looking beyond that in terms of educating and reskilling people displaced by AI and ML, looking at the trust and data ethics as a pillar. So we see a real movement. Some of the major banks have been very, very accommodating in this area. They want to be in the financial impact and social impact area. They want to be helping vulnerable people. They want to build products and services. They want to innovate with the FinTechs. They want to bring new things to market. But as Stephen touched on, you need standards and risk controls and governance and APIs, digital libraries, etc. But we see this as a movement. Just the other week, the National Emergencies Trust announced they wanted collaboration around the spread of COVID-19, coronavirus, and looking at the people that would be impacted. And the first thing they asked to the community, is there any data asset sets out there that would be useful to try and help these vulnerable people at this time?
Oh, thank you. That's really interesting. And actually, before I just continue the conversation, just for anyone that's joined partway through the conversation, please do have a look on Slido. Feel free to ask questions, and we'll try and get to them. If you see someone else ask a question that you really like, give it a like. That'll help us. And also, there was a poll. Please do feel free to respond to that poll around whether you believe open finance should be something that is mandated. I'll come back to that in a minute. But just to continue the discussion around some of the use cases, Brad, I know in your intro you were talking about the role you guys play and the services you're providing, and also the involvement with particularly advisory activities. I'd love to hear your perspectives on what you think open finance enables, actually what that means for the advisory industry. What are some of the interesting use cases that this could unlock?
Thanks you. So if you go back to really the core use case for open finance, and that's really creating an aggregated view. So obviously we can do that with open banking to a certain degree. You can bring together your payment accounts, but as has been mentioned by other guests on the panel, that a person's financial life is made up with many more products, many more assets on the asset side and also on the liability side. So that aggregated view should sit somewhere. Some sort of platform is going to offer that view to the end user. There's potential that it's personal finance management app. Your bank may do that, but really it does make sense for that view to sit underneath an advisor. So an end user can go, here's what I've got, here's my financial life, and present that to an advisor and get essentially advice on it. And if that advisor can see everything, they'll be able to give you a better quality of advice. That's sort of the main use case for, I would say, for advice in terms of having that aggregated view. It makes it better.
Fab, thank you. And just reflecting on the poll, so thank you. There've been quite a few people that have been responding already. It perhaps tees us up for a bit of a conversation around how open finance should be delivered. But there's a whopping 83% that believe open finance should be mandated. Now, I don't know how many of you out there sort of read through the FCA call for input. My personal perspective, it was a really well constructed call for input and discussion paper, and clearly they're trying to think through what is the right balance between taking a regulatory approach to create a catalyst for the market and make things happen, whilst also looking at how do you create the right market conditions for the ecosystem to grow and thrive. It's a really well written and I think well thought through piece, and I'm certainly fascinated to see what some of the input from different participants around the ecosystem will be. Stephen, I'd be really interested in your view.
Could I just interrupt before we do move on? Sam is extra eager to add to Brad's point. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I missed you waving there, Sam.
No, it's okay. I'm just saying that I think Brad is really alighting on something that I think we're probably underestimating in terms of the advice market, and I think so. To Brad's point, just to say more about, I think that we all know that the advice market is the face-to-face advice market is quite contained in that it can only service a certain amount. And I guess what I would like to add to Brad's comment about the open finance and the advice market is how powerful open finance can be in technology to enabling that advice to go way further, way deeper, because that's going to make the whole advice and interaction with the consumer much more efficient, and genuinely be able to give what has traditionally been at a very high level in terms of the wealth industry, right back down to the mass market. And I think to Brad's point, we shouldn't underestimate. It's something like 77% of the market at the moment would like advice but can't get it. And I think open finance and technology combined enables this hybrid of the wealth industry to really service the community, which they want to service, but have found it very tricky to do to date.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. It'll be interesting to see how much of a challenge it is to some of the traditional advisory market, and what a huge opportunity is to make that more efficient. Yeah, I agree. Tatiana, it looked like we had another visitor who's wanting to join in the discussion for a moment there. Yeah, just back to back to the question of how we start to move towards delivering open finance. Steve, I'd be really interested in your perspectives from sort of NatWest around how much opportunity there is to build on the open banking foundations that have been delivered, and what you think are some of the considerations and questions in the right way of driving this across the market, kind of mandate versus intelligent phasing. What are some of the other sort of nuanced points we need to think about?
Thanks for that, Hugh. For open finance to be successful and to benefit consumers, third parties, it needs to be both regulated and standardized. And there needs to be consistency across different financial markets and scope. On the question of whether you mandate this or not, I think there's got to be a mixture of both, because I think the danger that if you mandate everything, one, you don't actually address the use cases that either consumers or third parties actually want and where there is value. And also you tend to have something that is very expensive. And if you kind of look at what we've done in open banking, and I think the collaboration that the OBIE have kind of created across industry, and it's the first time you have that daily contact between banks and third parties, consumer groups. We've actually achieved an awful lot, I think, over the last 3 years. And I think having a kind of implementation entity model for open finance would be hugely beneficial. What I would expect the FCA to actually focus on from a regulation point of view is looking at the authorization of third parties, liability model, dispute resolution. I'm not sure as a consumer I would be happy with anybody having my data. I think I'd want them to be authorized by somebody in some way and then kind of assured. You also need to kind of look at the liability model, and you want to have consistency across the markets, because consumers are going to get very confused if liability or dispute resolution in banking is different to how it is for insurance or investments or pensions. So it's hard to get completely the same, but there does have to be some commonality. And I think you've also got to work with the industry to come up with a delivery plan that works, and maybe prioritize it in terms of where you look at product information, read information, write information. And the last point I want to make is really around having a model that is the right level of cost, because I think there would be a concern, especially when you look at some of the other markets and providers. There's some quite small people out there. They are not going to have the kind of delivery capacity of NatWest, Barclays, HSBC, and even NatWest, Barclays, HSBC. I mean, those were colossal streams of work. So you do have to bear in mind, if you want providers to join this and providers to share data, and the only way this works for consumer is you have as much of the market as possible. You do need to make sure it's proportionate on a cost basis.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point. I've seen sort of in other markets around the world as they've been thinking about this move, some slightly different tactics. I was in Brazil last week and talking to the Central Bank of Brazil, and they were looking at a model really trying to balance this regulation versus market encouragement. And they were looking at a model where a certain proportion, the biggest players were being mandated. Well, this is still to be confirmed, but being mandated to deliver APIs. The rest of the market, it was really reciprocity. So for them to also participate and connect to other APIs, they had to provide APIs themselves. Do you think those sorts of initiatives are worth thinking about as we move to open finance, or is it just a question of everyone should be mandated?
I think it's a basic human right. Everyone should be mandated. It's actually my data. It's not anyone. It's not all these companies that have got the data. It's actually my data. So I don't really understand why we're even debating this, to be honest. Yeah. I think the FCA and the whole governments worldwide just get on with it. Just, it's my data. I need to be able to access it and do what I want with it. It's my data. It's not the banks or the insurance companies or the health providers. It's ridiculous. It's the wrong way around.
And Shefali, looking at your face, you look like you agree.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with Sam. I mean, I think it is my data. And I think, the reason it's taken such a long time, I think banks have thought of it as it being their proprietary information. But at the end of the day, my data that I hold with my bank is actually mine. And so I should be allowed to do with it what I would like. And I think what perhaps, if you look at the counter argument, the reason it's just taken perhaps a little longer than it should have is because of questions on security and authorization and use and monetization. And in this world where data is monetized for, shall we say, nefarious reasons, then we really need to think about how that's being used and how transparent we are about that data and what it's being used for. So I, as an end user, might consent to an application having my data. Fantastic. What's the application doing with my data? What are they doing with it? If they store it, if they hold it, if they monetize it. And so all of those clarity around that has to happen. But I think, I completely agree with Sam. I think it's my data and I should be allowed to share it with whoever I want in terms of if I understand what they're going to do with it. Because I do want, as a consumer, better products and services and a plethora of options of how to use my money and save my money.
Yeah, thank you. And there's some really good questions coming online now as well. So perhaps there's a couple that relate to points that we've just discussed. One of them really around phasing. So Chris from Virgin Money, thank you. So the question is around, should we focus efforts on enabling further account type and data access for open finance, as opposed to enabling automatic API-driven account opening and switching? So if I understand this question correctly, it's really around phasing. Does it make sense to focus on broadening the information access first and then building on it from there?
I think definitely broadening the access, the data type first. So getting more clarity first before we worry about how you can automate that would be my vote.
Any contrary views around the panel?
No, I was just going to say that, no, I agree, because I think as you get into open finance, the amount of actions that you can do, if you look at, payment initiation as an action that you can do under the open banking, it really sort of becomes almost limitless. So you're talking account opening, trading, all this, the millions of different types of permutations that a trade can have, these types of things. So it's a huge scope of work. So it's probably, from a delivery point of view, you want to take it in chunks.
And it's a couple of questions, which and I may take a slight risk of grouping them together a little bit. So one is really around premium APIs and is the success of this dependent on a move to more of a premium API model? Now, I imagine there might be some different views here, going from the perspective of consumer data right. This is my data. I should be able to have access and move it anywhere. And another perspective, if I'm investing in capturing and enriching this data, I potentially, as a bank, should be able to start getting a recoup on my investment. What are the views on this? I mean, who's got a particularly strong view on the commercial aspects of this broad open finance?
Hugh, isn't the question a bit kind of invalid in a way? Because if the poll has suggested that 84% say that it should be mandated, if it's all mandated, there isn't going to be much space to have commercial APIs, because everything will be specified in regulation, everything will be mandated.
Do you think that's right, Stephen?
No, I don't, because I think if you look at what we deliver in open banking, only a proportion of the APIs are used, and they're used frequently. But we've built a whole load of services that haven't been used for last year. You speak to third parties and they don't intend to use them. Well, they might down the line. But there's other things that they come to you and say, well, actually, if you had done this or could provide this, this would be really useful to us. But that wasn't in scope of the regulation. So there is a danger if you over-mandate of unintended consequences regarding what data you get and how useful it is to you.
Yes, and I agree, Stephen. We believe that the citizen owns the data and should control, and the right to authorize and mandate that data comes to us. But one of the biggest challenges when the data does come to these organizations is the categorization and the usefulness of that data to ingest it and make good use of it. So it's one thing having the API, but if you do go right down the mandate route, you need to set standards in terms of the formatting of that data as it comes out. So it might be that the APIs aren't being used because the data is not useful, because it's not categorized or in a shape that third parties can use it. But I think it's a combination of legislation and a combination of open market, because totally running a mandated system from end to end, I'm with you that where would the innovation come and the differential come?
Yeah, I agree. Any other points of view, dissenting views on this one? No, perfect. Well, I will move on because there's plenty more questions. Actually, one of the questions, so Masood, thank you, asking about the consent model, and as we move to a broader open finance ecosystem, what does that mean for the consent model? And if I may abuse the privilege, I'll perhaps build on that a little bit and say, and also ask, what do we think this also means for the strong customer authentication model? Because here we're looking at, I think, a scenario where there's potentially giving consent to access to more things. So how do we evolve the consent model? But also many providers in the open finance space don't necessarily have the level of engagement or an app that has strong customer authentication built in the way that a mobile banking app does. For example, I don't have a pension app that I go and look at my pension. So I guess there's a question here around what do we think it means for how we evolve the consent model so it can capture more use cases. But actually, what do we think this means for the authentication model? Is this the moment that is really crying out for a federated bank ID model? So that SCA experience we're used to with our banks can be used more broadly. I realize there's a couple of elements to that. So I'll perhaps open it to the panel for whoever's got the fastest and strongest point of view. Looks like Sam's waving.
Well, can I just say, just from a consumer perspective, before perhaps some of the other areas of the panel kind of chip in on actually what the answer is, but can I just give a consumer view? Because we, obviously with MoneyHub, have been servicing a group of consumers that have been screen scraping until recently. So we had to migrate them over to open banking. And I don't know how many people in this kind of webinar would be shocked to hear that we've had quite a few requests from our consumers to go back to screen scraping. And the reason they want to go back is because, not because that they're upset about the link and the direct link that the open banking API gives them, but because basically they don't like the multi-factor authentication with some of the scenarios that are in place, and they don't want to have to reauthorize every 3 months. They're like, well, I didn't have to do that before, and I've been doing this for years, and I'm all happy. And so when you explain to them, well, A, it's illegal, so you can't screen scrape anymore. So you're not going to do that. We've got to do open banking. That's all there is to it, and it's much better, and all the rest. You can tell that then they're not 100% convinced. So I'd just like to put the consumer in the ring here and say that the consumers, once their trust is there and they're comfortable with who they're sharing or consenting to give that data to, that they're really wanting the convenience factor to kick in then. So I think we have got to crack that. And on my pension dashboard mode, one of the things I did say to them is, if you use that government ID to get into the pension dashboard, then there's no point any of us doing a pension dashboard, because no one's going to get in. So forget that. So we've got to find, and I'm not the person to do that, but I'm sure there are people in this panel that can do that. But do not set something up that creates such a high barrier for security that means that just no one can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. And you mentioned trust there as well. So I guess part of the question here is there more we need to do building on open banking to help drive more consumer confidence and trust in usage of these services as open finance extends? What do we think? Steve and Brad, Kevin, Shefali, I'd be really interested in your views.
I think in terms of the... Oh, sorry, no, you can go. I was just...
Go for it, Brad. Sorry, that was my bad. Brad, you go.
No, that's right. This was bound to happen. Bound to happen. I was just going to say, in terms of the consent mechanisms, again, from a consumer point of view, you really can't have them differentiate between open banking and open finance, because for a end user, they may not be aware that, for example, if you bank with Barclays, you also invest in Barclays Smart Investor, 2 different systems, but as far as they're concerned, that's one provider. They don't want to have 2 different methods for logging on. So it is an important thing, and perhaps a bank ID has a place to play, but I think there's a lot of issues around that. It's almost like a separate topic, in terms of, would such an ID go as far as KYC and liability issues around that sort of stuff, which is bigger topic.
Yeah, cheers, Brad. Shefali, please.
I was just going to say, I'll be very quick because I know we're nearly out of time. I was going to say 2 things. I think the first is to look at the psychology of the end user. And so to the point of building trust, one must also say, well, if they've understood to give consent in the first instance, then they've really understood why they're giving consent. And so we kind of lean in trust with them in terms of what they want to do. The second point to make is, I don't think as an industry we did a really terrific job about educating the consumer and the end user about open banking. And so what did that mean to reconsent? What did that mean to say, okay, after 90 days, this is why you have to re-authenticate and go through that whole authentication flow? Because it is regulated, it is mandated. Governments did it for our benefit. The European Union wrote PSD2 for exactly that same reason, from a GDPR PR perspective as well, it's really to protect the consumer. And so I think it's not the element of going it and throwing it away or just saying, look, they might not want it and let's just abrogate it, but making it frictionless, making it seamless. And for us as an industry to really make submissions to governments and to regulators to say there's actually a better way to do this. It starts with understanding the consumer's needs and understanding what they want, and then using technology to build that bridge to say this is how we do it, and this is how we do it well, so that it's frictionless, that the user experience is beautiful, and that ultimately that trust is maintained between the application, the intermediary, and the end user.
Yeah, thanks, Shefali. No, I agree. Kevin, any additional points that that you wanted to add?
I think just running off Shefali, I think that if you start with the customer value and what you're going to be creating, communicating, educating, making them aware of the new products and services, what value it delivers, that'll drive demand. But we need to keep researching into this. It's very early days. We need to keep an eye on the API conformance and standards, what impact it's having on competition and innovation, what impact it's having on vulnerable customers and inclusion. What's the level of trust is up? Does a customer really understand open banking? Really? If you stop anybody in the street, does it matter if the product and service is trusted and used and delivering value for them? But we need to look at what impact open finance will bring around key people in society, like vulnerable financial well-being, pension deficit, savings problem. So I think that going forward in the FCA call for action, it's got to move to citizen education and awareness and building things, allowing organizations to innovate fast and create sandboxes, create API standards, digital libraries, observatories where we can go and experiment in a safe environment, where we can take our algorithms and test for bias and things like that. We definitely need an infrastructure around this as well as some legislation. So I think it's fascinating to see how this will play out. There's quite a few moving parts in this.
Thank you. And Stephen, I don't know whether you've got any final comments before we wrap up, because we're sort of approaching the end now.
I agree from the comments around designing it from the point of the consumer point of view and having some consistency around how you do consent and authentication and security across open finance. I think the challenge is people say you can just build a technology solution that's easy. I think the last 3 years have proven that it's quite complex and quite difficult, especially when you see the range of firms involved in open finance and the various kind of histories and legacy of their architecture and what systems they can perform and support. So I think that does need to be thought about quite carefully, how you come up with something that's actually workable on both sides.
Yeah, thank you. Listen, I know we're approaching the end now, so I mean, I think from my perspective, this has been a really interesting debate, and I'm sure we've only just scratched the surface of some of the topics that participants will have touched on as they're feeding back their own input into the FCA's call for input on open finance. I mean, we've talked a lot around. I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity from extending open banking towards open finance. There's some great foundations to build on, I think, in terms of the standards and the industry collaboration and the existing consent model and things like that. But there's more to do to really make it work. And there's quite a few nuanced discussions here around how to get it right. That I'm sure this is a conversation that we could run on for hours, and I'm sure will continue over the coming months as businesses are feeding their input into the FCA on this. I wanted to thank all of the panel participants. This has been a really good discussion. I was frankly very scared about how this could go horribly wrong given the channel, and we're all learning our way through this, but you guys have made this very, very smooth and easy from my perspective. So thank you. I apologize to everybody who is watching that I have ruined this beautiful background behind me. What I'd like to say as well is the poll and the questions. Apologies, we haven't got to all of the questions. But again, the poll, I'd perhaps sort of ask people to think as well, would they still have the same view at the end than they thought? I'm sure some resolutely yes, others maybe have a slightly different opinion. And Helen, I wanted to just hand back to you, having thanked everybody, to say what you need to say and close the session, but thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. An amazing job. You're a pro, and I absolutely love the Dolomites behind you. I don't think you've ruined them at all. Let me just wrap up with a few thank yous. First and foremost, to the panel, absolutely amazing. You didn't miss a beat, and it looks like you do this every day of the week. We're all adapting to the new norm, so we're going to be doing this for many months. So if everybody wants this to continue this discussion, we will do. We really will do. The viewing figures have been good, and I've had a lot of emails as well as the poll, so I'll be sharing those as well. So a huge thank you to the team. If we were together, I would be giving you a glass of wine. So please, you've earned that drink this evening. Please do. And if at home you've got a glass in your hand, please do raise it to the panel. And they have worked incredibly hard, generously sharing their user cases, which is something that we're going to be talking about a lot more over the coming weeks. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, they have been amazing and have been very, very authentic. I would also like to thank the amazing team I have around me. She is called Tatiana. Thank you very much. You are superb. And without this, none of this would happen without you, Tatiana. So a huge thank you. And to Dom, who does the graphics. Thank you, Dom, for this. And Jeff and Martin. But primarily, Tatiana, I'll give you another shout out because you really, truly deserve it this week. You have worked your socks off. Thank you. And it goes, obviously, I need to say thank you to our amazing sponsors. They have been incredibly generous, shown true courage of leadership this week in terms of standing by us. So all that remains is my last big thank you is to you for tuning in, and together we will all keep each other company. I hope you're healthy, and please keep yourselves and your families healthy too. I will see you very soon. Thank you very much. Bye.